Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Everything HR podcast. I'm your host, Manuel, founder and CEO of Omni HR. Today, Rebecca and I are going to be discussing policies and procedures along with the employee handbook. Rebecca, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on again. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Another great day.
Oh gosh, I know that saying.
But so policies and procedures. Give me a little bit about your take on it.
I have no issues with policies and procedures. It helps provide a nice guideline. Um, do you have a more specific question as to what you're looking for?
Well, policies and procedures, like you said, they're good as a guideline, right? They're kind of the rule book that holds the business together. One big thing that I've had in the past is that people will have, or I should say, companies will have their HR write memos, or like their managers will write memos and then hold that as if it's an actual policy and procedure, but those don't actually hold true. Like,
Oh,
does that make sense? Like,
yes.
so basically, you have like your formal documentation and your informal documentation, but it's like trying to hold someone accountable with a post-it note.
Yes.
It's just not.
Like sending out an email not to start dumpster fires. So
Yeah.
that's obviously not in the handbook. But I do understand where you're coming from. Um, so if you want my take on it, policies and procedures, again, no issue with it. However, I have seen in certain workplaces that there are companies that will implement an actual formal policy. It's in their handbook, updated, whatnot, that they don't comply with state or federal laws. So, example, second pregnancy, you remember I was still working during it, and there were arguments between myself and the HR department regarding their PTO usage, that they were requiring the PTO to be used in certain manners, and it was legal with the state, but not with federal, and federal trumps state. Well, we had a dispute back and forth, and then so coincidentally, just a week before I was supposed to take my leave, the handbook got updated, and that required to take PTO was removed from the handbook. And I didn't sign the new handbook until I read all of it, and then I ended up not signing it anyway when I came back from maternity leave because I ended up leaving. But just something I noticed with companies that a lot of them get away with everything because they say if it's in the handbook and you signed, then you are required to fulfill it. But a lot of people don't read it, and they also don't do their research if it complies with both state and federal laws.
I mean, that is a great point. Following a good handbook does follow those guidelines. They follow the legislation that was written and is in place for the local the the local laws, and having that understanding, and on your part doing the due diligence of one, reading the handbook, and two, understanding and doing your own research on the local and federal laws helped you out, like, right,
Mm-hmm.
like it made it so that way you had an actual case and you had an actual defense for yourself, as opposed to a lot of people, like you said, they just don't read the handbook
Mm-hmm.
and they don't realize how important the handbook is.
Yes. And I know that this might sound maybe counterproductive. What I don't know the exact word to use, but with having you, my husband, in HR and your specialties, and then my mom as well with her HR background, I didn't read the handbook my many years of working until what happened with you, and I combed that handbook to see if there were any faults or any contradictions, any loopholes that I could possibly pull out. And they were thorough, but I was still determined to find something that I could prove that where they were wrong in. And honestly, what happened with you, they were right. I still disagree with the whole situation, how it went down, but still. Um, but I did find issues among their medical policies,
Mm.
the leave policies, attendance policies. So while I was looking stuff for you, I found for other areas that I was like, oh, this ain't right. And it ended up benefiting some certain personnel in my team as well as some of the other teams on premises, because when I found it and I heard what was going on with them, I educated them. I let them know, here are the resources that you should be looking at. Here are the portions of the policy. Now, some of them didn't follow through, and unfortunately, I have seen some wrongful terminations because people they didn't pay attention to those policies and what's that other word? Policies and
Procedures.
procedures. Thank you, procedures. Nor do they pay attention to the laws. So maybe they didn't want to fight, but that's a different topic. Um, yeah.
Gotcha. And I do want to touch base a little bit here. Whenever you're creating a policy and procedure, so this is a little bit more on the HR manager, director, the leadership role,
Hmm.
or someone who is maybe a leader in a small business who has to kind of take on the role of developing a handbook. So, handbooks are extremely important because they make it so that way you can hold your team accountable.
Right.
It should not be used as a hidden trigger that you are able to like
Yes.
pull a trap door and someone falls through it, right? Like
Yes.
having a handbook that is easy to understand, that can hold people accountable, but is used to benefit the team, not just being able to to take them out if
Hmm.
you need to. I think is really important. And one of the best ways to understand that is kind of the difference between policies and procedures. So a policy, you can think of it more as like a rule book or like a guideline. So these are the things that you have to color in between these lines, so that way you enjoy your time here. Procedures is like a standard operating procedures. It is a list of things that someone has to do. So those are kind of the differences, and that's something that will help you when writing it, is understanding those differences.
Hmm.
If you try to write a procedure in the same way as trying to tell someone to do a very specific thing, it kind of doesn't really make sense in that context when it's laid out. Like you have to understand both sides of it, and you have to understand kind of how it's done. Now, there are company wide policies and procedures, and there's also individual department company policy and procedures, because it really depends on the organization itself, how big it is, what it is that they kind of do. For example, a porter department may have different policies than the kitchen staff. And one of the main things is that they're doing different things. So they have different rules for the things that they do. For example, a porter or the cleaning staff may be able to go into certain offices or be able to do certain things and have access to certain areas, as opposed to another team member who might actually be higher up. Like maybe it's a manager or a leader. They may not have access to go into all the rooms that the porters do, just based off of their specific role. So having a firm understanding and being able to write that in a very clear and concise way is pretty important,
Mm.
especially for new businesses or even existing businesses, making sure that your team knows the rules basically.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with you. Especially since if you're not clear and concise like you mentioned, um it could become very murky,
Yeah.
and there will be quite a bit of areas to exploit towards someone that either is using it to help justify what they did wasn't wrong, or maybe someone who is looking to harm the company.
Hmm.
Like it can go in any direction. um and then when a company is writing to specifications of their own uh guidelines, if they're not well, I shouldn't say if they're not complying, but when they're trying to comply with the state and federal laws, it even that can become murky because sometimes the state will contradict the federal.
Yeah.
And um on the legality government side, that's it doesn't work out,
Hmm.
because if federal's like, this is a problem and now here's a fine because you didn't comply, it was a rebellious action, then that falls on the company and it becomes of an issue. So I'm not talking about the employee side, but more so a little higher
Hmm.
in the executive decisions, um, that are often overseen or are often uh, taken action against. It's kind of like it's better to ask for forgiveness, and in my opinion, it's not. I'm just don't do it. And if it's a genuine mess up, then it's a genuine mess up. But um, I think that when making these policies and procedures, it crucial to make sure that you have someone going over everything
Yeah.
and making sure it matches. And if something contradicts the other, then that has to be taken consideration. It has to be communicated with and altered to fit the overall federal law. I don't remember what that title is. Compliance
Hmm.
officer. Usually they're the ones to check that, right?
Sometimes this kind of breaks down to the organization itself, because a lot of companies will be different. My recommendation for anyone trying to develop a employee handbook or finish up their policies and procedures is actually seeking legal counsel. So seeking like an employment lawyer or a law group that focuses on employee legislation. And you can have your HR director or your VP of HR or whoever writing the stuff, but you want to make sure, like you said, going through it in a fine tooth comb, making sure that all the T's are dashed and all the I's are dotted to make sure that you
Mm,
don't have any issues.
okay.
And one of the bigger things that it kind of comes out to is, like you said, every state is different. So if you're one of these big companies that works in multiple different states, that's a whole different ball
That's
game.
right.
And then you have international as well.
Yeah.
So, for example, the laws that are here may not be the same, or definitely aren't the same as
Oh, for
India,
sure.
China,
Yeah.
all these other locations. So, having one singular handbook realistically probably isn't the best option. It should really be based off region.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that a lot of organizations don't think about, especially as they expand. They'll keep the same information and they won't realize that they're making that mistake until it's too late and until they actually have to terminate someone or until they have to hold someone accountable for their actions, and then
Mm-hmm.
they're out of luck because they didn't take the time to identify this previously.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that one state won't be the same as the other. Like
Mm-hmm.
we know that currently here in Illinois, it is not a right to work state,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Florida, where we used to be at, is. And you can take up a fight that you'll most likely win if you were terminated, even if it's not wrongful termination over in Florida. In Illinois, you're pleading your case to a rock.
Yeah.
But the reason why I bring that up is because there are a lot of people who live in one state but they work in another, be it um actual like in person. We live what 40-30 minutes away from Missouri,
Yeah.
and I'm constantly commuting, sorry, between the two. Or maybe you're working remote. When we lived in Florida, weren't you technically based in Arizona or something of the sort?
My kind of the job I was hired was through Florida still, but I was working on a project based in Arizona. It didn't
Yeah,
change my tax code
because
or
but you
anything
had
though.
like a different time difference,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Time difference is different, stuff like that. I would still, because the company was big and I was hired through Florida, I was still
right.
under Florida law, but yeah.
And at the time, you didn't really have to look at, you said, the Florida law. You didn't really have to check laws or anything because an issue wasn't brought up to where you had to, do I look at Arizona? Do I look at Florida? There are some people that will live in a state, but remotely they are assigned to another one. So we can use, like right now, Illinois. If I was to remotely be working over in California, it's going to be rough.
Mhm.
California, I think Hawaii, and and what, three other states or something like that. They have very, very different work laws.
Yeah.
Um, and we've noticed it on applications. If you live in one of these states, and California and Hawaii, you're always the first ones listed.
Yeah, no,
You've
absolutely.
noticed that.
Yep.
Um, the reason why it's that way, if you ever see that on an application, is because their workers' laws are so different.
Hmm.
But continuing, it is very important that although you live in a state but you work in a different one, especially one that is so different than the state that you live in, it's important that you verify those policies and procedures because certain laws will contradict each other. That if the work policy is you are I'm going to just use an example. Oops, sorry. I'm just going to use an example. You were rightfully terminated after your grace period
Hmm.
or during your grace period.
Okay.
But the state that you live in is against that, then you have to do a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
Your pay scale, it's apparently your pay scale doesn't matter about the state you work in, but it's the state you live in, and there's a debate between that because sometimes it's the other way around. So I do recommend that people really take caution to working in areas that they don't live in, um, especially if you're getting a promotion, you get a new job, and it requires you to move, especially if it's a promotion within the company and you're required to move to a different state.
Yeah.
Um, definitely check those laws before you even accept the promotion.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. Doing your due diligence, doing your research is extremely beneficial and will save you a lot of headache down the line.
Mm-hmm. So if you want to talk about the workplace behavior while we're on policies and procedures, I
Yeah.
think that can ride in tandem if you're okay with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I know we're trying to keep it short today, but I love talking about this stuff.
No, same,
It's more
same.
up your alley, but I do love talking about it. So, the workplace behaviors, and we have seen some interesting things, haven't we?
Yeah.
And I mean, interesting things to like actual violence in the workplace, urinating on a building, on your actual workplace building.
Yep.
Um, there are
Threatening,
some,
stealing a bottle.
yep, threatening, stealing a bottle. When we say bottle, we're talking about a adult beverage at a casino.
Bottle of liquor.
Well, I don't know if Spotify will block that.
I don't I don't think
We'll
so.
find out. But we have, yeah, I think even to some of the what's considered the more minute air quotes, the
Hmm.
minute behaviors such as the petty behavior between one colleague and another.
Yeah.
So instead of me going on a tangent about it, I want to open it up to you because you're more of a realistic, logical thinker when it comes to any type of situation,
Hmm.
and you hold your head. Whereas I'm like, I'm ready to fight. So I want to hear you.
So I'll use an example of a previous team member that I had who was actually homeless when we ended up hiring them. And in my opinion, me and one of my other managers, we actually went above and beyond for this team member.
Mm-hmm.
We gave them a basically like an upfront paycheck, even if though they haven't worked yet. We let them use our work phone as well as even our cell phone to like download apps and be able to like get like a care credit and things like that set up. So we did quite a bit to try to help them out. Um, and then it came down to a workplace behavior issue that we actually ended up terminating them.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the biggest reasons that we ended up doing the termination was it just came down to following policies and procedures, following our code of conduct, and really just generally not handling themselves in a way that we were looking for at the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why I bring up this as an example is that there's a ton of team members, there's a ton of people that don't really go over don't go through the coaching, don't go through the mentorship. It's like a one and done firing process.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, whenever you're doing a termination process, when it comes to workplace behavior, the way you want to do it is you want to have a few, like maybe a verbal warning, and this is depend on the severity of the behavior. So using this particular situation, getting aggravated with another team member and then yelling at them, that could be a coaching
Mm-hmm.
or a written warning, depending to what level of it was. Like if they're cursing at them, if they threaten to fight them, different story. I would increase that level, which I actually ended up finding out after I had already given her a verbal warning that they ended up threatening
Right.
one of our other team members, which I was not very happy with my manager at the time for not informing us of that
I think
situation.
if I can recall, this person that threatened someone else was the someone that offered the homeless person a place to stay.
Yes. I don't know too much about the behind the scenes details
Yeah,
there.
there's further detail, but
Yeah, yeah.
the point that I'm getting to is that this person burned their bridges with someone who was willing to help,
Yeah,
with a lot of people who were willing to help. But continue.
no worries. And then yeah, so basically start off with the coaching. Having proper paperwork is extremely important.
Hmm.
And in this situation, having possibly a first warning, maybe a second write up is kind of the next step. And then from there, it would be like a final warning. So this is where the policies and procedures come into play for your workplace behavior because paperwork matters. Making sure
Yes.
that you have a trail, making sure that you have documentation
Yes.
helps you when it comes to unemployment debates or the counselings. When it comes to, them putting in a complaint or filing a charge. Having proper paperwork, making sure that you have written statements, making sure that you have times, dates, making sure that you have very critical details. If you could have recordings and pull recordings from the video cameras, things like that, all that comes together. And that's how you build your case and that's how you protect your business.
Hmm.
At the end of the day, a business is a business and you have to take care of a lot of team members. You can't risk a case that will hurt you if but as you grow it's going to happen anyways. But it's just best to be prepared for it, and the way you do that is with paperwork. So we took care of everything, did the paperwork, and then ended up pooling a termination at the end. And it's one of those things where I prefer to coach, especially in the beginning, coaching a performance improvement plan. Like I really like putting as much effort as I can in the front end to stop the misbehavior, to stop any issues, stop poor performance. And then if you can't, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't control someone.
Right.
We have this conversation with our daughter all the time. Like, look, I can only show you right from wrong. I'm never gonna, put a gun to your head and tell you that you have to do something. At the end of the day, you still have the ability to make your own decisions.
That's right.
I can only guide you as best as I can, but that's it.
Yeah.
It's at the end of the day, it's on
Speaking
you.
of making someone do something, Judge Judy had mentioned through multiple of her cases where someone's like, well, I had to do it. And she asked, did this person threaten you? Did this person put you in a position in which your life was threatened or someone that was close to your life was threatened? And that made you have to do it. And 9 out of the 10 times, someone would say no. And she would say, then you didn't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You made the decision to do it. And I know a lot of people find controversy in that because they feel like they have to do something in order to make their life smoother in some sort of manner, or someone else's life smoother in some sort of manner, because it can affect more than one person. But a lot of the times we see in the now and not in the future. Um, and that brings us back to this person's behavior in the workplace. She was in the now at that time being, instead of thinking of her future, instead of thinking of this is my chance to get off the streets. This is my chance to actually do something with my life to get myself together. But instead, um, they took it to a degree with not just management, but to my awareness, it was everyone in the store.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only so much tolerance that can be allowed in a workspace.
Yeah.
So by following through like you did, you gave her more than enough chances. But by following through, you not just demonstrated to that individual, but to everyone in the vicinity in a professional manner that you have so much level of grace, so much grace to be given. But this is a business. You are not going to come in acting like a child
Mm-hmm.
and threatening, harassing the people that are around you, um, acting certain ways in front of customers. So I could definitely see that the termination was inevitable.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. And with that, when it comes to terminations, when it comes to behavior, when it comes to your performance and things like that, as a leader, you have to be subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Or, excuse me, you have to be objective, not subjective. You have to be impartial to the situation. So when it comes to subjective, it's basically the way that you feel about the situation. When you were being objective,
I
you're
thought that was
not.
the other way
No,
around.
you're
So
not
I got it
feeling it.
wrong.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
I did too. You're. It's not about your feelings. It's about what is right and what is wrong.
Okay.
If you give one person 7 chances, but you give the next person two, then as a leader,
Yeah.
you were wrong.
And then the first person's going to think that's discrimination, and then you find yourself in a rabbit hole, probably, of a case.
Correct. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why policies and procedures have to be updated.
Yes.
They have to stay on. You have to make sure that you're communicating with your team if you do make that update, because when it comes to things like this, it's extremely important. Like
Mm-hmm.
it is necessary.
Yep.
Just taking unemployment by itself, if you're a small business and you're putting out unemployment, you're paying for someone who's not working for you. As opposed to if, they could go take a step further and they could start charging for discrimination, or they could start saying, it wasn't equal opportunity.
Yeah.
But
Anything can be said in a workplace
yeah, absolutely.
or
But if
anywhere.
you are completely objective and no matter what, you are doing things by the book, you are taking care of your paperwork as it comes, you're doing everything as you need to do it, then you're
Yeah.
covered. And even if they win that case, you know that you were right.
Yeah.
You know that the situation was controlled. You did everything to the best of your abilities. And you know what? Sometimes it just kind of
There's always one.
it always kind of works out like that.
But you made very valid points about if you follow steps A to Z, you're golden. You can have a wonderful handbook set in place and with all the policies and procedures that are to the key. But if you don't follow those steps,
Mm,
then it's useless.
mm.
So just definitely make sure that you are implementing and following through with what your policies and procedures are to make sure workplace behavior is indeed where it needs to be.
Well, like we said, we're going to keep it a little bit shorter today. And if you stuck with us this long, I truly appreciate it. If you like the content, please rate the show. And if you're feeling a little crazy, maybe share it with someone.